morning from IISS in Washington, D.C., and a warm welcome to today's webinar on conflict briefing on Pakistan, domestic turmoil, protracted conflict, and regional implications. My name is Benjamin Petrini. I'm a research fellow at the International Institute for Strategic Studies in the Conflict, Security, and Development Program, a research program that monitors armed conflicts and domestic instability at the global level. We analyze the implications on countries' development and peace trajectories and on international security. Our team produces the IISS yearly flagship publication on Armed Conflict Survey. We just published last November the 2022 editions, which is a compendium of all the main conflicts globally. Today's session is part of a conflict briefing webinar series, which many of you will be probably familiar with. We are now running in our third year. We take one of the countries, fragile or conflict-affected countries, and we analyze all the different conflict risks and the conflict landscape, not forgetting the regional and international environment, as well as the domestic political situation. Now, on Pakistan, everyone is familiar with Pakistan's troubled and conflict history since the partition with India in 1947 and then the secession of Bangladesh in 1971. To this day, the country seems to be in a permanent state of turmoil with compounding economic, political, and security challenges, both domestically and regionally. And this is what we will analyze today. In particular, we will follow three lines of discussion. First, the domestic instability with the ongoing political fragmentation, which is compounded by one of the worst economic crises with profound social ramifications. There is a booming inflation, depleting foreign reserves, and accompanied by obviously rising poverty as basic necessities are out of reach to millions of citizens. Pakistan is currently struggling to repay its debt, and many analysts warn of the risk of default as Sri Lanka experienced last year. This situation couples with the devastating floods that devastated entire regions in 2022, leading to the destruction of livelihoods for millions of Pakistanis, hunger, displacement, as well as the risk of waterborne disease. The second line of inquiry for this webinar, which is squarely in the armed conflict landscape, is about the numerous long-standing and ongoing threats and insurgencies that Pakistan has faced and has been facing. Pakistan is characterized by ethnic divisions and center-periphery clashes, leading to endemic conflicts with various minorities, including the Baloch, the Pashtuns, the Sindhis, who over decades have claimed either enhanced rights or political representation or outright secession. These groups historically have distinctive understandings and practices of kinship, power, role of the state, and citizenship, which represent a structural challenge to the state of Pakistan. The third line of discussion is about the regional environment and the international one. And here, obviously, there are two main issues that we will talk about. One is the regional conflict with India, which started in 1947 and is one of the longest standing interstate conflicts globally. And second is the relation between Pakistan and Afghanistan, and we want to take stock of how this has changed since the Taliban took power back in Afghanistan in August 2021. Now, I have the pleasure of welcoming, in order of appearance, first Arifa Noor. Thank you very much for joining us. Arifa is a leading opinion writer and broadcaster with Pakistan's Dawn Media Group based in Islamabad. She's the anchor of Newswise on the Dawn News television channel. Welcome, Arifa. Then we have Antoine Levesques, who is a research fellow for South and Central Asia Defense Strategy and Diplomacy here at the Institute. He specializes on Pakistan's political and security perspectives and regional nuclear issues, as well as South Asian policies toward China. And last but not least, Rahul Roy-Chaudhury, a senior fellow here at the Institute who leads the Institute's, the IISS South and Central Asia Defense Strategy and Diplomacy Research Program. Thank you all for joining. Now, before giving the floor to Arifa for her first set of remarks, just a quick housekeeping. This webinar would last for 1 hour. We will have a first set of introductory remarks by all the speakers, followed by some questions and answers from our audience. You can open the Q&A window and type your question to the panelists, and I will relate that question to them. Now, Arifa, again, thank you very much for joining us. Would you give us a bit of an overview about the compounding challenges politically and economically that Pakistan has been going through and is going through in the last year or so?
Thank you so much. Thank you, all of you, especially IISS and Rahul, for inviting me to this. So Pakistan has been through, I would say, a raft of challenges in this past 1 year. We saw a change of government since then, as you've mentioned. There are the security challenges and the economic crisis. So if you look at them individually, perhaps we can say to some extent that none of this is new for Pakistan. But perhaps what is new is the fact that all of these have hit Pakistan at more or less the same time. To quickly wrap up where we are right now, we saw a change of government within the existing parliament last year, exactly 1 year ago in April. That parliament year is coming to an end in August this year. But what has caused a little bit of a political and constitutional mess is the fact that 2 out of the 4 provincial governments, the provincial assemblies, were dissolved prematurely by Imran Khan. His party had the government in Punjab and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. They took the decision to dissolve the assemblies. Elections, provincial elections for these 2 assemblies were to be held within 90 days according to the constitution. That those 90 days are over, but no election date has been set because for various reasons. I'll go into those later. There is a court case also because Pakistan Supreme Court is known for getting involved in political issues. So there is a court case ongoing with counter moves by the government. The issue is nowhere near resolution at the moment. So the 90 days have passed. There are caretaker governments in 2 provinces, but we seem to have no idea when they will take place. And more seriously still, the national government elections and the elections for the 2 remaining assemblies should also technically be held in October. But at the moment, nobody is very sure whether they will be held. So political instability is perhaps new for Pakistan. This level of uncertainty as to when or how political change will take place, whether it will take place and how it will happen is very uncertain at the moment. And this now happens at the same time where we have an economic crisis. You said that there's talk of or fear of or default. In some ways, perhaps we are teetering near it already because the only reason we haven't faced default is for 2 reasons. One, a lot of our debt is said to be bilateral. Here I'm quoting economic experts because this is not really my field. But a bulk of the debt is bilateral. So the chances of, getting rollovers or talking to the governments is relatively easier. But at the same time, because of the balance of payments crisis, there's been a clampdown on imports for months at end now. It's leading to shortages in the market. A lot of the industry has shut down because it's import dependent. But there is no way that the government can afford to let the imports through because we just don't have the money to pay for them. So, there is a little bit of that meltdown or default that people keep talking about is already there in some ways. Then there is also a third aspect to it, which is the polarization. We seem to be witnessing a level of polarization that is not really been seen in the recent past in Pakistan. And that polarization is there in society and in political parties to some extent. But beyond that, it now also extends, at least in my opinion, to the institutions. In Pakistan's history, we have usually had a working relationship between the military and the judiciary, which has tended to then, address political problems or navigate or supervise the political process. That seems to be at the moment, this could change tomorrow, I don't know, this seems to have broken down. Within the Supreme Court, we have, public divisions between the judges at the moment. But more importantly, for once, it seems as if the superior judiciary and the military are not seeing eye to eye. And what this basically means is that you have a bit of a constitutional crisis. And if you want to take any unusual measures, which we have seen in the past, the chances that it will get a legal cover seems difficult at the moment, because Pakistan is one of those countries in which even when you have a military coup, it's something that the Supreme Court will then step in and give a legal cover to. So this seems to be missing at the moment, and there is some kind of a tug of war there also. Similarly, if you talk about the military, this is also rather unusual that for once we see a military which perhaps is facing a number of challenges. There is talk of a difference of opinion within, and I use these words very carefully, because what we're talking about is the fact that the military leadership seems to have taken or appears to have taken a certain political position. But the rumors and the talk about how this is something that perhaps the rest of the rank and file do not agree with refuses to go away. And it's been a year since we are facing this kind of a situation. Now, what does this mean? This also means that a military which has always felt that, it had a supervisory role to play in politics and that it had a legitimate role to play in politics, there are now questions about that role or the legitimacy of that role. This also then leads to capacity issues. How equipped is a military to intervene, and how directly in politics, if there are constant questions about its legitimate role vis-a-vis the politics. Then obviously there is the external environment. That's very important. And by the external environment, I don't just mean the economic crisis, but the larger issue that if you look at Pakistan's history, the military has always had a very critical role to play in terms of the aid that comes to Pakistan, whether it's, because of the Afghan crisis, the first one or the second one. But that also allows the military to then occupy a certain role domestically, because the military becomes the interface not just for the world, but for also that key economic aid that's coming in. Now that has also changed. And of course, last is the internal security threat. We went through a very bad period in the early 2000s when the military was dealing with a threat from the TTP. There were large-scale military operations that took place. And then obviously things improved significantly. But since the new government in Kabul, the Taliban, Afghan Taliban takeover of Kabul, things have changed rapidly. And the security situation is again picking up. And here again, the military faces two issues. The first one primarily is, again, that the economic situation is such that we don't know whether they are in a position to carry out large-scale military operations. Second is, of course, the fact that this time around, the people in the affected areas are so wary of what they went through earlier that there have been, a number of protests where the people have come out in large numbers in parts of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa to not just protest the presence of the Taliban, the Tehrik-e-Taliban, which has been coming back from Afghanistan, but also against any chance of a large-scale military operation, because they don't want to go through the kind of displacement and suffering that they did earlier. So I think these are the main issues, and domestically, politically, the military is stuck. It's stuck supporting a government, I would say, which doesn't seem to be very popular, and it faces a political party that it doesn't like, but which seems to be very popular, and not just very popular in parts of the country, but very popular with the very constituency that the military earlier counted on. And I think this is a major dilemma for the military, that the class in Pakistan that supported or felt that the military had a legitimate role to play in Pakistani politics has now shifted its loyalty to Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, Imran Khan's political party. And this is now also leading to a very significant noise and criticism of the military's role, which is new for Pakistan. And of course, the social media just allows it to be projected far more loudly. I think I'll stop here before I hope I haven't gone over my time already.
Thank you very much, Arifa. You provided a very concise but super comprehensive overview. And what I take away from your remarks is how many of these challenges, as you said, they're not new, but what is new and unprecedented is really how they are happening at the same time. The unprecedented level of institutional uncertainty, the economic crisis, and the level of polarization, not only between and within parties, but within institutions and the role of the military. So I think this is a very a great overview. Let me turn it to Antoine. Can you reflect and tell us a little bit where Pakistan stands vis-a-vis its numerous internal security challenges and armed conflicts with the minorities and different armed conflicts? And if I can ask you, Arifa, to mute yourself, please, before Antoine. Thank you. Antoine, the floor is yours.
Benjamin, thank you. Good day to all on the call. It's a pleasure to speak on the landscape of conflict, armed actors and terrorism in Pakistan. I'll do my best not to repeat some of the points made earlier by Arifa. It's never an easy undertaking to talk about this from an international perspective. You can mistake the noise for a signal, you can misinterpret information gaps in the puzzle, you can overstate continuities and change, you can broad brush, or you can misunderstand how the order of individuals' allegiances to each other and to entities evolve. These are just 5 common pitfalls of looking at the landscape of terrorism and related violence in Pakistan. These issues matter more than ever today because Pakistan is going through the general election process, which Arifa discussed. The 4th since the restoration of national elected governments in 2008. Then violence had marred both campaigning and its aftermath. And since then, terrorism has been a background consideration in most elections, and I think it will be again in this one, if only at the campaigning stage. The second reason the landscape matters is China. It is deeply invested bilaterally in Pakistan to the tune of $25 billion plus through the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC. As China changes its policy approach to the Belt and Road Initiative globally, something the IISS discussed in a recent dossier released at the end of last year, China pays more attention to risk-taking, particularly of the non-financial kind. This puts Pakistan into its spotlight. Thirdly, this landscape naturally matters to the well-being of the people of Pakistan, those in the name of whom Pakistan released a first national security policy in January 2022. Given the time constraint, I won't dwell on the question of Kashmir, and I will let Rahul say a few more words on Pakistan, Afghanistan. But my top line here is that the landscape of conflict in Pakistan is fractured with discrete but converging tensions with strategic effects unseen perhaps in a decade. The Pakistani Taliban, or Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, TPP terrorists and insurgents challenge the state. There are Baluch nationalists, there is sectarian strife, all against a persistent background of violent extremism. It's important to keep those strands of conflict distinct from each other, while recognizing at the same time that in terms of state response, enabling networks, sometimes personalities, and certainly external perceptions, these all add up to form a worrisome whole, greater than the sum of the parts. The question is always to assess over time, across changing contexts, where the variance is between the sum of the parts and the whole. The situation today is far from that of 2008. Successive Pakistani governments and military leaderships have genuinely succeeded in stemming the high tide of terrorism violence, which Arifa referred to. But as the trend line of attacks and related events reached a floor towards 2018-19, incidents have risen again to over 300 to 400 a year, going up. A correlation with events in Afghanistan is both hard to dismiss, but also hard to tightly prove. The 2020 US Taliban joint declaration, the August 2021 US withdrawal, and Pakistan's favorable reaction to both played a role in the resurgence of terrorist violence in Pakistan. Security sources insist also on the flow of cheap weapons from Afghanistan into Pakistan as a result of the new dispensation. As Benjamin reminded us in his invitation, the Peshawar attack last January has come to symbolize that a step change in the wrong direction for the country's fragile security situation is now happening. This is worrying policymakers and security officials, not just in Islamabad, Rawalpindi and provincial capitals, but diplomats and other officials in the region and as far as major capitals. For some countries furthest afield, counterterrorism with Pakistan is no longer, and clearly not yet, within their top current 5 priorities, however. The TPP is now at its strongest and most threatening for the state of Pakistan and its interests since 2015, when it was reduced and driven out of the tribal areas by large-scale conventional counterinsurgency and counterterrorism efforts, known as Operations Al-Bihaz. The Taliban regime in Afghanistan has harbored whom it considers its brethren on its soil, itself a bitter irony given that Pakistan had long denounced Kabul's benign neglect of the TPP under the pre-2021 governments. My sense is that the outlook on the TPP as a threat to be minimized will be dominated in months to come by a harder military-led security approach under Army Chief General Asim Munir within the provisions of what Arifa referred to, which is a constraint or a question mark over constraints of economic order. But I think a drone strike we saw take place in April 2022 on Afghanistan soil is something of a practice to look to in the future. There is a lack of consensus politically on how to go beyond this, and this is likely to re-emerge in the election context as an important issue. Looming also is the Afghan Taliban's accommodation of remnants of Al-Qaeda, and the possibility this opens, therefore, if only by syllogism, that accommodations with the TPP could take place, even if there's no evidence of this so far. Moving on to Balochistan, the insurgency there is ongoing with a tough security response. It is driven by economic grievances. The IISS Armed Conflict Survey 2022 states. Details about the forces in presence and local situations are hard to come by, such as the fluctuation between fragmentation and unity of the groups operating there. The Afghan Taliban's takeover in Afghanistan has constrained the scope for Pakistan to argue that India plays an abetting role in this insurgency. Armed violence in Balochistan has targeted and negatively affected Chinese activities and perception of opportunity in the region within the China-Pakistan economic corridor. And there have been plenty of attacks in recent 18 months to show for that. Sectarian strife continues with a connection to particularly attacks by the local affiliate of IISS, the Islamic State Khorasan province, involved in exploiting sectarian divisions by attacking Shias. All of this against a background of violent extremism, which persists in Pakistan as a result of persistent effects of decisions taken well over a generation ago, but also weaknesses in Pakistan's education system, including, according to experts, as a matter of recent policy. In conclusion to this short overview, the landscape of conflict in Pakistan is just that, a landscape with growing strategic effects on Pakistan's statecraft and security. Depending on which part of this landscape is photographed, a geographical area rather than another, or if the focus is on the trees rather than the forest, the rendition, if not the impression of it, alters quite dramatically. My own sense is that the leadership of Pakistan is acutely aware that there is a window of opportunity fast closing for the country to put forward its geo-economic credentials in an era of major power competition. Therefore, the question of resourcing and the question of sequencing the resolution of some of these security challenges remains entire. I'll stop with this final thought, but I look forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Antoine, for this very detailed overview of the different challenges, and I think you put forward some thoughts for further reflections on really like how do we is it a priority, the resolution of these conflicts in the face of many challenges that are more in geoeconomic and in regional terms. So I think that we can take some of that for the discussion. Let me turn it to Rahul. Can you give us now a sense of the regional environment in which Pakistan is in? Obviously, the conflict over Kashmir is the primary aspect of this, but what's your take on the regional and international environment? Thank you.
Thank you, Benjamin. I think really what we're seeing today is that Pakistan faces a two-front challenge in terms of its regional security from Afghanistan, and we heard a bit about this from Arifa and Antoine, and also from India. So let me just briefly say a few words on the Afghanistan part and then move on to the India part. I think the two sort of big issues in relation to Afghanistan have been mentioned previously, but really the first was a sense in Islamabad and Rawalpindi in August 2021, when the Taliban took over, that actually the relationship would improve tremendously between Pakistan and Afghanistan, especially after the reign of President Ashraf Ghani and Hekmat Karzai. I think clearly we saw that this was not to be the case, and as we mentioned earlier, the terrible terror attack on the Peshawar mosque, I think it was just the latest example of this. But it sort of focuses our attention, I think, on two issues. One is the nature of the influence that the Pakistan security establishment had over the Afghan Taliban before August 2021. And there could be a view that, well, actually, there was the support and sanctuary that Pakistan provided. But when the Taliban took over Afghanistan, that relationship eroded, and the influence that the Pakistan security establishment had over the Afghan Taliban decreased tremendously. And we're seeing that in terms of the rise and the resurgence of the TTP, and clearly the reluctance of both Kabul and Kandahar to try to curb some of these cross-border developments that are taking place. I think this is one big issue in terms of the TTP, but also in terms of the nature of the influence that the Pakistani security establishment had. The second big issue related, I think, but separate in many ways, is the border issue, where again, whether it is the Pakistan-Afghanistan border or the Durand line, there are sort of concerns there. Refugees coming across from Afghanistan to Pakistan, drug smuggling. So, again, these are sort of interwoven, but need to be seen in terms of their own sort of areas of concern and the impact that it has on the bilateral relationship. Where do we go from here in the relationship? Well, I don't see any immediate sign of change unless, of course, as Arifa was alluding to, if the Pakistani military decides, to sort of to take military action against the TTP, that is likely going to change some of the dynamics on the Afghanistan side. But Arifa's point also was well made, and that is that there is reluctance on the ground in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa for another military operation against the TTP in that area. So shifting to the India side, I think what we've seen really is sort of a tense relationship that Pakistan has with India currently, and it emanates more recently from two or three major developments. The first development was the military confrontation that both countries had in February 2019, where there were airstrikes by both countries on the other's territory, and this was a result of a terror attack on the Indian side of Kashmir, which the Indian government blamed on Pakistan. This military confrontation was the worst that both countries had gone through in over 2 decades, and there was concern in the international community and I think within the region also about escalation of the conflict and the possibility of a sustained armed conflict as a result of that. Fortuitously, that did not happen. The second cause of tension took place 6 months later, when the BJP government and Prime Minister Modi was re-elected for a second 5-year term. And in August 2019, a few months after he was re-elected, there was a revocation of Article 370 of the Indian Constitution that provided special status for Kashmir. And though it was a temporary provision, no one had really sort of revoked that article. Now, on the Indian side, it was claimed that this was an internal matter. It had nothing to do with Pakistan. There were no sort of changes in the border, etc. The Pakistan government obviously opposed this and said it was a violation of UN resolutions and continues to oppose it. So these were the two sort of key factors that have contributed to the tense relationship today. As a result of the second, the Pakistani government withdrew its high commissioner from New Delhi, and we do not have high commissioners today of both countries in either country. Having said that, I think there are three mitigating factors also in this respect. The first is that notwithstanding the level of tensions, there is clearly at the moment, I think in both Pakistan and in India, a tremendous focus on domestic politics. So we've heard that from Arifa and the challenges Pakistan is going through domestically. India is also going through, has started its year-long electoral process for general elections to take place by April, May next year. So in a way, the focus and the level of tension are sort of subsumed in terms of both countries' alternate priorities domestically. So I think that's one important factor to bear. The second is that despite the ongoing tensions, there have been some aspects of cooperation. And one particularly important one was when in March 2022, there was sort of an unarmed missile from the Indian side landed deep into Pakistani territory. Now that could have escalated into a crisis, but because of the Pakistani military chiefs at the time, General Bajwa's restraint. That did not happen. That incident did not escalate. And I think we need to see that as a positive development that took place, which really Pakistan played the most important role. We've also had a continuation of the ceasefire on the line of control since February 2021. There have been meetings of the Indus Water Commissioners, though there are concerns that Pakistan has over certain recent issues on water rights. And there has also been the first sort of transit that Pakistan has allowed on land from India for wheat and medicine to Afghanistan. So there are some sort of, some positive developments that have taken place. As we go forward, I think there are two things that are important. The first is that whether there can be I suppose, a general sort of maintenance of the state of affairs as it is today, tense, but not conflict-like. And that's important because, as I said, domestic priorities for both countries are far more important. Secondly, there will be a huge question that both countries have to deal with, which is over Kashmir. For Pakistan, it will, and has stated publicly, will not enter into any talks with India unless there is a reversal of the revocation by India of Article 370. The Indian side is fully adamant, and the government and the opposition parties, that there will be no reversal of Article 370. So in this case, the conundrum is, well, how do we move beyond this diplomatically? Because if India is not willing to talk to Pakistan on Kashmir, and Pakistan is not willing to talk to India unless Kashmir is on the table, there is a dilemma. Now, I'm not saying this has to be sorted out immediately, but it's something that both countries need to bear in mind, and I hope prepare for some compromises to take place. My final point and a challenge is that as we go into the next few months of electioneering, particularly in India, there is a concern over rhetoric that some parties may use for polarization purposes in India. And I think it's important that the rhetoric is lowered. It will be a signal, most important, I think, to the Indian electorate, but also equally, it will be a signal to Pakistan if the electoral rhetoric in India is lowered. So I think there are, again, there's a challenge in the first case and possibly an opportunity in the second one, but we'll have to see what happens. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rahul, for this overview of the two front challenges on the Afghanistan side and on the India side. We can move on the question from our audience. I see that there are already some questions, but first I'd like to go back to our speakers to ask in a sense, now we have heard the three different perspectives: the domestic politics and the economics, the internal security and the regional security, and how do we make sense of all the three together going forward? In particular, Arifa, I'd like to come first to you and ask you, can you elaborate a bit on the role of the military? Obviously, the military has had a historic role in the country, has stepped in several times, times of domestic crisis, and you have pointed at a legitimacy strain lately, and issues of capacity. How do you see this going forward, the role of the military? And also, if there is anything that you want to react on what the others have said.
Thank you. No, I was, in fact, the only thing I'd like to say is that I think I agree with most of the things Rahul said in terms of the challenges and the opportunities. And of course, the bilateral relationship, despite all our best hopes, I don't think there is bound to be any change in the coming days. The role of the military is critical to Pakistan. As I said, that, it's not just a role the role domestically plays out partly because of the role that the Pakistani military plays geostrategically and for the international world. But times have changed. Part of the economic problems that Pakistan is facing is because the world around us is changing. And the unfortunate thing, or I think the challenge right now, is that that the leadership within Pakistan still seems to either doesn't want to accept because it's a very difficult thing to accept, or is having troubles coming around to the fact that the world is changing. The idea of conflict, the idea of Afghanistan being so important, and how that is, and on the basis of that, how a lot of the countries that we thought of as friends, the way they worked has changed. And so this is also impacting the military, and it's impacting it domestically. It still continues to be the most important player. If today we don't have elections or there's uncertainty, you can't say that the military doesn't have a role to play in this, good or bad. But at the moment, I think what is happening is that there is an issue of capacity because it is still continues to be very bogged down with the security challenges in at least two states. There's Balochistan, as Antoine went into quite great detail explaining. There is the insurgency challenge in Balochistan. There is the conflict to manage in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. There are, of course, one hostile neighbor, one with whom we're trying to manage the relationship. I wouldn't call it hostile as far as the military is concerned, but it's not an easy one. And it's also causing security problems at home. But at the same time, so you're dealing with all of this, and then you have a key role to play in domestic affairs. But as I said, here the problem is that where you have a relationship of conflict with two provinces, the Pakistan military, where Punjab is concerned, the biggest province, has always had a more benign relationship. It is a relationship in which the people of Punjab felt that the Pakistani military has a benign and a positive role to play in Pakistani politics. And it is also where the Pakistani military drew its legitimacy from. But now that province politically seems to want to vote for a party that appears to be at loggerheads with the military. So as I said, it's very difficult to identify. When I say that there is a certain class in Pakistan, I mean, this is not to put it in actual class terms, but there is a class in Pakistan which was relatively privileged. It was a relatively loud class. It had clout, it had influence, it could speak. This was the class that tended to support the military because it felt that the politicians were noisy, they were corrupt. They didn't do such a good job of governing the country, and the military that kept them in check or intervened directly, and that was not such a bad idea. At the moment, this class seems to think that the PTI government will be the best option for the country. And the fact that they feel that the Pakistani military is actually preventing the PTI victory in elections to take place means that loyalty is divided. So how easy is it for the Pakistani military to go forward with this? Because post-Zia, it has also changed, it has changed the way it sees itself. The Musharraf coup, in comparison to, let's say, the 70s coup, was a very benign coup. It was a very enlightened coup, It was not a very repressive regime either. But right now, that no longer seems possible, just in terms of not just if you intervene directly, but also the indirect intervention means that there is a lot of criticism on social media of the military, and the way they're dealing with it is through old tactics, which don't go down well. Again, as I said, it's a class that the military, that saw itself aligned with the military.
Thank you very much. I see comments and questions that are coming in. Antoine, let me turn it to you on what is your take on the military and its role and how it is facing the different internal threats. You have put some points earlier, but maybe you want to elaborate a bit on it or react to what Arifa said. And also there is a question here. I'm going to start combining them because I think that there is a scope. Some are repeating themselves. What is the evolution of counter-violent extremism policies in Pakistan today? Over to you, Antoine, for some comments on this.
Thank you, Benjamin. At the risk of some repetition, I think it's important to note the fact that resources are finite. They always were. I mean, I've heard several army chiefs of Pakistan explain that they needed more resource at any given time when times were budgetarily more allowing. There is also what Arifa mentioned, this idea of encirclement by a fairly hostile environment. I've also heard a number of Pakistani army chiefs in the past talk about several fronts, not just the two which Rahul highlighted, but there's an internal front and it's complicated. There's also the consideration to do with really what, and I suppose that's more on the plus side in terms of the army and the military particularly. It is that if you go back to the text of the national security policy released in early last year, there is that determination that essentially the economy of Pakistan needs to grow so that the budget allocation to the military can remain in proportion terms unaffected. And so there is that clear sense that the military's import on the national exchequer and the budget is very high indeed. And so I don't think there is yet a sense of contestation of this. But as the economy finds itself under considered stress, particularly this year, we may see some contestation of that fairly wide consensus, which expressed itself in January 2022. So that would be one answer on the military. On extremism and countering it and so-called CVE policies, I think efforts have been afoot for many years. There was rehabilitation, experimentations and widespread implementation in the wake of the Zabe-Azb operation in the mid-2010s. These efforts are still ongoing, but these are in a broader context where the politics of Pakistan at times reward expressions of radicality, which then are unhelpful in helping a shift away from security-heavy counterterrorism towards more root cause treatments around countering extremism, be it in specialized camps for particular individuals or profiles, or be it in the education system more widely. And I referred in my comments to a sense that perhaps some recent policies in the educational domain have been part of the problem more than part of the solution. But I am ultimately encouraged by the direction of travel over the last few years, certainly the years I've been looking at the country. And there is a line in that national security policy of Pakistan, which again is this guiding document, which I think will likely get an update in the coming years as we come out of this election cycle we've been discussing. And the line reads as such: extremism and radicalization on the basis of ethnicity or religion pose a challenge to our society. And it goes on and discusses what to do about it. Now, to me, that sets matters in the right direction. It's a question of implementation. It's a big question, but I think the direction of travel is somewhat encouraging.
Great, thank you, Antoine. Rahul, you've spoken about the more immediate neighborhood for Afghanistan. Can we widen a bit the net now and include a bit the international level? There is a question here around why has China not helped through via economic assistance Pakistan lately, given their strong diplomatic ties, and also how Pakistan reacts or is reacting to the increasing US-Indian relations, and what might the implications be from that. So can you give us a bit of an overview of Pakistan in the international geopolitical competition, if you will?
Sure, Benjamin. Let me just focus on the US aspect, and maybe Antoine, who works on the China-Pakistan relationship, could focus on the earlier part. I think clearly, in terms of of Pakistan, there is concern in Pakistan that the India-US relationship is becoming stronger. The depth and breadth of the relationship bilaterally is going into new areas. And that again is of concern to Pakistan, because it would mean essentially transfer of technology, US technology to India, production of weapons, etc. Now, the US-India relationship has nothing to do with Pakistan, but everything to do from the Indian side with China. And I think there is obviously at some stage there needs to be discussion on the interaction, the interplays in this respect. But as the India-US relationship strengthens, clearly there is an opportunity also for the Pakistan-China relationship consequently to strengthen as well. Though there may be some challenges in that respect, as there are challenges in the India-US relationship. But I would also say that we've also seen an improvement in the Pakistan-US relationship with the current government as opposed to previous government of Imran Khan. The US has provided some military aid assistance to Pakistan. There have been several visits. It's not the relationship is much better than it was previously. So there is I think there are moving parts in all three aspects: the US, India, the Pakistan, China, consequently, and the Pakistan, US as well. But important to say that the India-US relationship is primarily from both the US and the Indian side in relation to China, not Pakistan.
Thank you very much, Rahul. So let me turn to you, Antoine, on the question of China and the growing relations and the economic and security aid.
Thank you. I mean, very quickly, I think it's a relationship which has the originality of having been steeped in a defense and military bind historically, around which an economic layer was added towards the end of the decade of the 2000s, and obviously under the China-Pakistan economic corridor. I think it's a very complex relationship, the one between Pakistan and China, if only in consideration of the order in which that history and the constitution of that relationship took place, but also because the stakeholding on both sides is complex. Yes, the military plays an important role in both countries, but diplomats do, economic interests do, policy banks do also, the way people relate at an individual level, also possibly at a more generational level now that there are more people-to-people contacts. All these things don't necessarily work in a coherent way. And so it's important to look at these complexities, at that patchwork of nuances, when appreciating some of the policy statements coming out either from China or from Pakistan, or indeed some of the silences, which can be interpreted often or more increasingly in a sort of worst case or in a less than benign context. So my point here, I suppose, is to just say that in my understanding, things appear often more complex than they always are. That said, China is all over discussions of security in South, maybe call it Southern Asia now. And this is not going to end anytime soon. And some of the perceptions which Rahul referred to do bring in Pakistan as an ancillary to Chinese statecraft.
Thank you, Antoine. Arifa, a final question for you, or like dual question, very, very quickly here from our audience. One is about what is today's role of religion in both the government and the military. And a second question, if it is possible for any political party to rule and govern Pakistan without the support of the military. So is this a frontier or something that Pakistan can go to, or it is not?
Thank you. Religion still plays a very critical role in Pakistan and in any government. I think at the moment, the way our history has panned out, the way the state and society has been structured, and we really do not have any mainstream party that can afford to, just stand up and say that it's a secular party. That religion always plays a critical role, just in terms of the rhetoric, in terms of the discourse, and in terms of policies, but more so the rhetoric and the discourse. I mean, Imran Khan spent 3 years and, constantly referring to Medina, where the Prophet first, the Prophet of Islam first set up his first state, or so to speak. And he kept sort of referring to that to say, this is what I want to take Pakistan back to. This is the kind of just and incorruptible society that we want. And he continues to talk about that. And when you have this new government in place, even they're constantly sort of talking about, one of the points that they have picked up is to talk about interest rates and how the current finance minister, with all the problems that he's having with the IMF and the economy, he's making sure that there's this constant display of him holding meetings, which are basically about removing interest from the economy. It's ridiculous. Everybody knows he's not going to do it, but it becomes a point of trying to score brownie points in a country where he's getting bashed from every side, including his own political party. Where in militancy is concerned, of course, we've had a lot of talk about it, and there also have been efforts at some level to say that we need to look at a different interpretation of Islam, to not talk about violence and jihad. But again, the parameters are still defined by religion. You cannot say that, we need to sort of look at a different parameter in which to have this conversation. That conversation, good or bad, is had within the parameters. And obviously, then that has its own side effects. And we have at least one provincial assembly in Pakistan, where despite all the polarization in the past 3 years, every bad law, and I call a lot of them bad deliberately, they have come and been passed unanimously because they had something to do with Islam. Sorry, now I've forgotten the second question, the role of the military and the political parties. I think political parties can rule without the military, but that opportunity has never come. And this is particularly true post-2008. Post-Musharraf, something has changed. The intervention of the military, to some extent, the ingress, I would call it, has gotten to a stage where all political parties have learned one message, that if you are not on the right side of the military, you will not be allowed to win an election and take power. So for me personally, and I can be wrong about this, but my sort of sense is that till the military realizes that it's perhaps better to let the political parties govern, this relationship will not change. It's not that the political parties want it. I think they're in a bind where they feel that without this, it's not possible.
Thank you very much, Arifa. We are out of time, but I want to give Rahul the chance for a last comment. I have a follow-up question, but feel free also to just react to what others said. And it is about a follow-up on the relations with Afghanistan. You told us about sort of the failed expectations that the Pakistani government had on improved ties with the Taliban. Does the historic role that Afghanistan plays for Pakistan, about the strategic depth for Pakistan, does that role is still valid today, that framework of understanding the relations between the two countries?
So I think that if we're looking at the relationship on the ground between Afghanistan and Pakistan, clearly in operational terms, that does not hold at the moment. Now, I'm not saying that things cannot get better between the Taliban government and Pakistan. In all probability, they could, but we'll have to wait and see on this. But I think the issue of strategic depth with the Taliban government now is quite different from the way the context that was used earlier for it. Remember also that there's been an outreach from India to the Taliban as well. So India has, after leaving Afghanistan, the diplomatic missions leaving Afghanistan, there is now the Indian embassy in Kabul has been reopened with a few people there. But the important part of it is that India is physically back in Afghanistan, and the Taliban, there have been various messaging from the Taliban leaders sort of seeking, I think, economic support from India, etc. So India is back in Afghanistan as well at the moment. So I think things have changed a bit. But just before I end, there was a question from a former colleague at the IISS, Dr. Kiran Hassan, about the role that China could play in brokering an India-Pakistan normalization of relations through the SCO summit that will take place in India in July. And my sense is that, that there's no appetite today in either Islamabad or in Delhi for such a normalization because of the domestic politics priorities that are taking place for both governments. So there is no appetite in both countries for this, and B, China will find it difficult to play such a role, especially in terms of the tense relations it has currently with India.
Thank you, Rahul, for picking that extra question as well. I want to really thank very much our three panelists. I certainly learned a lot from today's session. It's been a very interesting discussion. We will have a recording of this webinar on our website within a day, and stay tuned for the next conflict briefing. Thank you all very much.